The Miami sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elena Vasquez's corner office, casting golden rays across the mahogany desk where she'd built her empire one contract at a time. At 34, she was the CEO of Solaris Marketing Solutions, a digital marketing agency that had grown from a spare-bedroom startup to a multi-million-dollar company with offices in 3 states. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was Latina, in an industry dominated by white men. Yet she'd managed to carve out her own piece of the American dream through sheer determination and 18-hour workdays. Elena paused her review of quarterly reports as her assistant knocked on the door. "Mrs. Vasquez, your husband is here to see you." David walked in with that familiar smile that had charmed her 8 years ago at a networking event in Coral Gables. His sandy brown hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccable as always. He was everything her traditional Cuban grandmother had warned her against. Too smooth, too handsome, too eager to please. But Elena had been young and ambitious, and David had seemed like the perfect partner for someone climbing the corporate ladder. "Mi amor," he said, using the endearment that once made her heart flutter but now felt rehearsed. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced." Elena gestured to the chair across from her desk, noting how David's eyes swept over her office with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Of course not. What's on your mind?" David shifted in his seat, running his hand through his hair, nervous habit she'd noticed appearing more frequently over the past few months. "Elena, we need to talk about us, about our marriage." The words hit her like a cold wave despite the warmth of the Miami afternoon. Elena set down her pen and gave him her full attention, though a knot was already forming in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "I think we need some space," David said, his voice carefully modulated. "We've been growing apart, and I think a temporary separation might help us figure things out." Elena stared at him, processing his words. They'd had their rough patches, sure. The long hours she worked, the stress of running a business, the fact that David had been increasingly distant since her company had really taken off. But divorce? The word felt foreign and sharp on her tongue. "David, where is this coming from? I thought we were working through our problems." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "We are, baby. That's why I think this separation could be good for us. Just a few months apart to get our heads straight. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and he's drawn up a simple separation agreement. Nothing complicated, just the basics to protect both of us while we figure things out." Elena felt her world tilting slightly. "You've already spoken to a lawyer? Without talking to me first?" "I wanted to make sure I had all the information before we discussed it," David said smoothly. "Look, I know this is a lot to process, but I really think this could save our marriage." The next hour passed in a blur of David's carefully constructed arguments. He painted a picture of a couple who had lost their way, who needed time apart to rediscover what they'd fallen in love with. He was patient, understanding, even tender as he explained how the separation would work. Elena would keep the house. He'd move into a downtown condo. They'd split expenses temporarily, and the business would remain untouched during the separation period. "The agreement is really straightforward," David assured her, pulling out a thick manila folder. "Just standard language to protect both of us. My lawyer says it's better to have everything in writing, even for a temporary separation." Elena flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. Her Spanish had been her first language, and while her English was flawless after years of American education and business dealings, legal documents still sometimes felt like deciphering a foreign code. The papers seemed to say what David claimed: a temporary separation with clear guidelines for the interim period. "Elena, I know this is hard," David said, reaching across the desk to take her hand. "But I love you, and I think this is our best shot at making things work long-term." Looking back, Elena would remember this moment as the precise instant when her life changed forever. She would remember the way David's hand felt slightly damp against hers, the way his eyes didn't quite meet hers when he said he loved her, the way her gut told her something was wrong, even as her heart wanted to believe him. But in that moment, sitting in her successful office with her husband of 8 years, asking for space to save their marriage, Elena chose trust over instinct. She signed the papers with her characteristic bold signature, the same one that had built her business and sealed million-dollar deals. "There," she said, sliding the documents back across the desk. "If you think this will help us, then I'm willing to try." David's relief was palpable as he gathered the papers. "Thank you, mi amor. I really think this is going to be good for both of us." As he left her office, Elena tried to shake off the feeling that she'd just made a terrible mistake. She turned back to her quarterly reports, throwing herself into work the way she always did when her personal life felt chaotic. Numbers didn't lie, profit margins didn't betray you, and business growth was something she could control. 3 weeks later, Elena was working late in her home office when her phone rang. The caller ID showed her best friend Maria's name. "Elena, are you sitting down?" Maria's voice was tight with concern. "I'm always sitting down when I'm working. What's wrong?" "I just ran into my cousin Roberto at Starbucks. You know he works at the courthouse downtown, right?" "Elena, he said he saw David there last week filing divorce papers." "Not separation papers, mija. Divorce papers." The words echoed in Elena's head as she stared at the separation agreement David had left with her, now sitting in her desk drawer. Her hands shook as she pulled it out and read through it again, this time with the desperate attention of someone looking for clues to their own destruction. "Elena? Are you there?" "I'm here," Elena managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maria, I need you to do me a favor. I need the name of the best divorce attorney in Miami, someone who eats lawyers like David's for breakfast." As she hung up the phone, Elena felt something cold and hard settling in her chest. It wasn't heartbreak, that would come later. It was the sharp, focused anger of a woman who had built an empire through intelligence and determination, only to be outmaneuvered by someone she'd trusted with her life. But David had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the woman who had turned a $5,000 loan from her parents into a multi-million-dollar business. He'd forgotten that Elena Vasquez didn't just survive. She conquered. The war was just beginning. The law offices of Martinez, Goldstein, and Associates occupied an entire floor of a gleaming high-rise in Brickell, Miami's financial district. Elena sat in the mahogany-paneled conference room, her hands folded on the polished table as she watched attorney Carmen Martinez review the separation agreement with the intensity of a surgeon examining a tumor. Carmen was everything Elena had hoped for when Maria had recommended her. Sharp, successful, and with a reputation for dismantling opponents with surgical precision. At 52, she was a Cuban-American woman who had built her practice representing high-net-worth individuals in complex divorces, and her office walls were lined with awards and photos of her with politicians and celebrities. "Mrs. Vasquez," Carmen said finally, setting down the papers and removing her reading glasses. "I'm afraid I have some very bad news." Elena's stomach clenched, though she'd been preparing herself for this moment since Maria's phone call 3 days ago. "Tell me." "This document you signed isn't a separation agreement. It's a comprehensive property settlement that's been carefully disguised. Look here." Carmen pointed to a paragraph buried in the middle of page 7. This clause here, written in deliberately complex legal language, essentially states that in the event of dissolution of marriage, business assets acquired during the marriage will be subject to equitable distribution. "But Solaris Marketing was my business. I started it before we were married." Carmen's expression grew grimmer. "That's where it gets more complicated. According to the financial records my investigator pulled, your husband has been listed as a co-owner of the business for the past 5 years. His name is on the LLC registration, the business bank accounts, even some of the major client contracts." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible. I would never—" She stopped, memories flooding back. David helping her with paperwork when she was overwhelmed. David suggesting they add his name to accounts for legal protection. David insisting he should be involved in client meetings as your partner, Mrs. Vasquez, I need you to think carefully. When did your husband start taking a more active role in the business? Elena closed her eyes, the timeline becoming clearer with each passing second. About 5 years ago, when we really started growing. He said he wanted to help, that it was important for spouses to support each other's dreams. Her voice cracked. He was so supportive, so involved. I thought I was lucky to have a husband who cared about my success. Carmen leaned forward. Mr. Peterson has been planning this for years. This isn't a spontaneous decision or a midlife crisis. This is a calculated long-term strategy to position himself as an equal owner of your business so he can claim half of it in the divorce. The room seemed to spin around Elena. How much is he claiming? According to the petition he filed, he's seeking 50% ownership of Solaris Marketing Solutions, plus alimony, plus half of all other marital assets. Carmen's voice was gentle but firm. Elena, if he wins, you could lose everything you've built. Elena stood abruptly, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Biscayne Bay. The water sparkled in the afternoon sun, dotted with white sailboats and luxury yachts. She'd always found the view calming, but now it just reminded her of how far she could fall. There has to be something we can do, she said without turning around. I built that company from nothing. I worked 18-hour days. I sacrificed everything, my social life, my health, my relationships with my family. I can't lose it to someone who contributed nothing but paperwork manipulation. We're going to fight this, Carmen assured her. But I need you to understand what we're up against. Your husband has been methodical. He has documentation showing his involvement in the business, witness statements from employees who can testify to his presence at important meetings, even email records showing business decisions where he was included. Elena turned back to face Carmen, and the lawyer could see the transformation happening before her eyes. The shocked, betrayed wife was being replaced by the sharp, determined CEO who had built a multi-million-dollar empire. What do you need? From me? Elena asked. Everything. Every document, every email, every record that shows the true nature of your business relationship with your husband. Financial records showing the source of the initial investment, proof of your sole involvement in the early years, evidence of your unique contributions to the company's growth. Elena nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. Carmen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. How bad is this? What are my realistic chances? Carmen was quiet for a long moment. Elena, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Your husband has been planning this for years, and his lawyer is Harold Brennan, one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in South Florida. They've built a solid case, and Florida is an equitable distribution state, which means the court will try to divide marital assets fairly, not necessarily equally, but David's team will argue for a 50-50 split. So what are my chances? If we can prove fraud, if we can show that his contributions to the business were minimal compared to yours, if we can demonstrate that he manipulated you into signing documents under false pretenses, then we have a fighting chance. But it's going to be a battle, and it's going to get ugly. Elena felt a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, though there was no warmth in it. Carmen, David made one crucial mistake. He thinks he's dealing with the same naive woman he married 8 years ago. But I didn't build a multi-million-dollar business by backing down from fights. As Elena left the law office that afternoon, her phone buzzed with a text from David. Hey, just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I know this separation is hard, but I really think it's for the best. Love you. Elena stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. I'm doing great, actually. Learning a lot about myself lately. Talk soon. She hit send, and then immediately called her assistant. Jessica, I need you to cancel all my meetings for the rest of the week. I have some very important business to attend to. That evening, Elena, sat in her home office surrounded by boxes of documents, her laptop open to financial records, her phone buzzing with calls from Carmen's investigative team. The house felt different now. Larger, emptier, but also somehow more hers than it had been in years. She picked up a framed photo from her desk, herself at the grand opening of Solaris Marketing's first real office 3 years ago, cutting a red ribbon with oversized scissors while David stood beside her, smiling for the cameras. At the time, she'd thought his presence was sweet, supportive. Now she could see what she'd missed. The way his hand rested possessively on her shoulder. The way he positioned himself to be prominently featured in all the photos. The way he'd made sure the local business journal identified him as co-founder in their article. Elena set the photo face down and opened her laptop. If David wanted a war, she'd give him one. But he'd forgotten one crucial detail about the woman he'd tried to destroy. Elena Vasquez had never lost a fight that mattered, and nothing had ever mattered more than this. Elena hadn't spoken to Roberto Castellanos in 3 years, not since their business relationship had ended in a flurry of mutual frustration and unspoken disappointments. But as she sat in the parking lot of his consulting firm's building in Coral Gables, she knew he was the only person who could help her now. Roberto had been her first real mentor, the venture capitalist who had believed in her vision when Solaris Marketing was nothing more than a PowerPoint presentation and a dream. He'd provided her initial funding, guided her through her first major client acquisition, and taught her the ruthless business strategies that had transformed her from an ambitious entrepreneur into a formidable CEO. Their professional relationship had ended when Elena had decided to buy out his stake in the company, a decision that had cost her financially, but had given her complete control of her business. The receptionist at Castellanos Consulting looked surprised when Elena introduced herself. "Ms. Vasquez, Mr. Castellanos will be so pleased to see you. He's in his office. Go right in." Roberto looked up from his computer as Elena knocked on his door. At 62, he was still the imposing figure she remembered. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made people either respect him or fear him. His office overlooked the Coral Gables business district, and the walls were lined with photos of him with politicians, business leaders, and celebrities. "Elena," he said, standing and embracing her warmly. "This is an unexpected pleasure. Please sit down. Can I get you coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great," Elena said, settling into one of the leather chairs across from his desk. "Roberto, I need your help." "Of course. What's going on?" Elena spent the next hour telling him everything: David's deception, the fake separation agreement, the divorce petition, the claims against her business. Roberto listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. "That son of a bitch," Roberto said finally. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I should have warned you about him years ago." Elena looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" Roberto was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "When you first started dating David, I had my investigator do a background check on him. Standard procedure for any of my clients who were entering serious relationships. You were too valuable an investment to risk losing to a gold digger. And David Peterson has a pattern. He's been married twice before, both times to successful women, both times ending in divorce settlements that left him significantly wealthier. His first wife was a real estate developer in Atlanta, and his second was a tech entrepreneur in Austin. In both cases, he gradually inserted himself into their businesses, established legal claims to ownership, and then filed for divorce claiming 50% of everything." Elena felt sick. "You knew this, and you never told me?" "You were so happy," Roberto said quietly. "And he seemed different with you, more committed, more involved. I thought maybe he'd actually changed, that he'd found someone he genuinely cared about. I convinced myself that my investigation was wrong, that I was being overly protective." Elena stood and walked to the window, trying to process this new information. The man she'd been married to for 8 years, the man she'd trusted with her dreams and her business, was essentially a professional con artist who specialized in destroying successful women. Roberto, I need more than just sympathy right now. I need strategy. Roberto smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. Now that's the Elena I remember. Okay, let's talk strategy. What does your lawyer say? Elena filled him in on her conversation, with Carmen Martinez explaining the challenges they faced and the strength of David's legal position. Carmen's good, Roberto acknowledged, but she's thinking like a lawyer, not like a businesswoman. Elena, you have advantages that David doesn't know about and weapons he doesn't expect you to use. Such as? Roberto leaned back in his chair, his eyes taking on the calculating look Elena remembered from their early business meetings. First, you have me. I still have contacts throughout the business community, and I can make David's life very difficult if he tries to claim ownership of a company I helped build. Second, you have your employees. How loyal are they to you versus David? Completely loyal to me, Elena said without hesitation. David was never really involved in the day-to-day operations. He showed up for meetings and events, but the staff knows who really runs the company. Good. Third, you have your clients. Most of them have relationships with you personally, not with David. If there's any suggestion that the ownership of the company is in dispute, they're going to be very nervous about their contracts and campaigns. Elena was beginning to see where Roberto was going with this. You think we should go on the offensive? I think we should remind David that divorce is a two-way street. If he wants to play dirty, we can play dirtier. If he wants to claim ownership of your business, we can make him prove he actually contributed something of value. They spent the next 2 hours developing a comprehensive strategy. Roberto would reach out to his contacts in the business community, making it clear that David's claims against Solaris Marketing were fraudulent and that any business relationships with him would be viewed unfavorably. Elena would meet with her key employees and clients, reassuring them about the company's stability, while subtly documenting David's minimal contributions to the business. Most importantly, Roberto would use his resources to investigate David's current activities and his previous marriages, looking for evidence of fraud or pattern of behavior that could strengthen Elena's case. There's one more thing, Roberto said as their meeting wound down. Elena, you need to be prepared for this to get very ugly. David is going to attack you personally, professionally, and emotionally. He's going to try to paint you as a workaholic who neglected her marriage, a control freak who pushed him out of the business, maybe even an unfit spouse who doesn't deserve to keep what she's built. Elena nodded. I'm prepared for that. Are you? Because the Elena I knew 3 years ago was brilliant but also vulnerable. She cared too much what people thought, and she let her emotions cloud her judgment. This fight is going to require you to be ruthless in a way you've never been before. Elena looked at Roberto for a long moment, then smiled. A cold, determined expression that would have made David very nervous if he could have seen it. Roberto, 3 years ago, you were right about me. I was vulnerable, and I did care too much about what people thought. But David has spent the last 8 years teaching me some very valuable lessons about trust, about manipulation, and about what happens when you underestimate your opponent. He created a monster, and now he's going to have to deal with her. As Elena left Roberto's office that evening, she felt something she hadn't experienced since signing those papers in her office. Control. David had won the first battle through deception and manipulation, but the war was far from over. Her phone buzzed with another text from David. Missing you tonight. I keep thinking about how good things could be between us if we can work through this separation. Maybe we could have dinner this weekend? Elena stared at the message, marveling at his audacity. Even now, even while actively trying to destroy her life, he was still playing the role of the caring, concerned husband, hoping for reconciliation. She typed back, I'd love to have dinner. I have so much to tell you about how I've been spending my time lately. As she hit send, Elena felt a sense of anticipation she hadn't experienced in months. Let David think he still had her fooled. Let him believe she was still the trusting, naive woman who had signed his papers without reading them carefully. He was about to learn just how much Elena Vasquez had grown up. The Coral Gables country. Club dining room buzzed with the quiet conversations of Miami's business elite as Elena arrived for her dinner with David. She'd chosen the location deliberately, neutral territory where David would feel comfortable, but where her growing reputation in the business community would provide her with subtle support if needed. Elena had dressed carefully for the occasion, a tailored black dress that conveyed both professionalism and confidence, paired with the diamond earrings David had given her for their 5th wedding anniversary. She wanted to look like the successful CEO she was, but with just enough of the wife he remembered to keep him off guard. David was already seated at their table, and Elena noted that he'd chosen a corner booth that would provide them with privacy for their conversation. He stood as she approached, kissing her cheek in a gesture that looked affectionate to any observer, but felt calculated to Elena. "You look beautiful," he said as they settled into their seats. "I've missed seeing you dressed up." "Thank you," Elena replied, accepting the glass of wine he'd already ordered for her. "You look good too. Relaxed. The separation must be agreeing with you." They spent the first part of dinner making small talk, David asking about her work, Elena inquiring about his new downtown condo. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple working through marital difficulties with maturity and grace. Elena played her part perfectly, even laughing at David's jokes and touching his hand across the table when he spoke about missing their life together. "Elena," David said as their entrees arrived, "I've been doing a lot of thinking during our time apart, and I realized something important. I think I've been too passive in our marriage, too willing to let you carry all the weight of our financial success. I want to be a real partner to you, in business and in life." Elena took a sip of her wine, buying herself time to formulate her response. "That's interesting, David. What would being a real partner look like to you?" "Well, I've been thinking about taking a more active role in Solaris marketing. I know I've been supportive from the sidelines, but I think I could really contribute something valuable if I got more involved in the day-to-day operations." "More involved than you already are?" Elena asked innocently. David shifted slightly in his seat. "What do you mean?" "Well, according to your divorce attorney, you're already claiming to be a co-owner of the company. I'm just curious about what additional involvement you're thinking about." The change in David's expression was subtle but unmistakable. The warm, concerned husband disappeared, replaced by something colder and more calculating. "Elena, I think there's been some miscommunication. My lawyer might have used some strong language in the initial filings, but that's just standard procedure to protect both of our interests." Elena smiled and reached for her purse, pulling out a manila folder. "I brought some reading material," she said, placing several documents on the table between them. "I thought you might want to review some of these papers before we talked about the future of our marriage." David's eyes flicked to the documents, and Elena saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "What is this?" he asked. "Well, the top document is a copy of the divorce petition you filed 3 weeks ago, the one where you claim to be entitled to 50% ownership of my company. The second document is a forensic accounting report showing that in the 8 years of our marriage, you contributed exactly $0 to the initial investment, development, or growth of Solaris marketing." Elena's voice remained conversational, but her eyes were steel. "The third document is particularly interesting. It's a private investigator's report on your previous 2 marriages. Fascinating reading, really. I had no idea you had such a clear pattern of targeting successful women, gradually inserting yourself into their businesses, and then claiming ownership during divorce proceedings." David's composure cracked completely. "Elena, I can explain." "Oh, please do," Elena said, leaning back in her chair. "I'm particularly curious about your explanation for how you managed to walk away from your first marriage with $2.3 million from your wife's real estate development company and another $1.8 million from your second wife's tech startup. That's quite a track record for someone who claims to want to be a supportive partner. The color had drained from David's face, and Elena could see him calculating his options. The dining room around them continued to buzz with quiet conversation, but their corner of the restaurant felt like the center of a storm. "You hired a private investigator?" David asked. "I hired several," Elena replied. "Turns out when you have the resources of a multi-million-dollar company behind you, you can find out quite a lot about someone. For instance, did you know that your current lawyer, Harold Brennan, has been contacted by the Florida Bar Association regarding potential ethics violations in his handling of your previous divorce cases?" David sat back in his chair, and Elena could see him trying to regain his composure. "Elena, I know this looks bad, but you have to understand." "I understand perfectly," Elena interrupted. "I understand that you spent 8 years systematically positioning yourself to steal my life's work. I understand that every supportive gesture, every offer to help with paperwork, every suggestion that you should be included in business decisions was part of a long-term plan to rob me blind." Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "What I don't understand is how you could look me in the eye every morning for 8 years, knowing what you were planning to do to me." David's mask slipped completely now, and Elena saw the cold, predatory intelligence that had been hidden beneath his charm. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've figured everything out?" "I think I've figured out enough," Elena replied. "You haven't figured out shit," David hissed. "You signed those papers, Elena. You gave me legal standing in your business, and no matter what you think you've discovered, I have documentation going back 5 years, showing my involvement in Solaris marketing. I have witnesses, I have emails, I have financial records showing joint decision-making." Elena smiled, and for the first time all evening, it was genuine. "You're absolutely right, David. You do have all of those things. You've been very thorough." David looked confused by her concession. "There's just one small problem with your master plan," Elena continued. "All of that documentation, all of those witnesses, all of those financial records you're talking about, they're going to be very difficult to present in court when you're facing federal charges for wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft." David's face went white. "What are you talking about?" Elena opened her folder again and pulled out another document. "This is a complaint I filed yesterday with the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. Apparently, using false documentation to establish ownership claims in a business for the purpose of fraudulent asset seizure during divorce proceedings is a federal crime. Who knew?" Elena stood up, leaving the documents on the table. "Your pattern of behavior across 3 marriages establishes clear intent to commit fraud. The fact that you used mail and wire communications to facilitate this fraud makes it a federal matter, and the fact that you manipulated me into signing documents under false pretenses, well, that's where things get really interesting from a prosecutor's perspective." David stared at her, speechless. "Oh, and one more thing," Elena added, pulling out her phone and showing him the screen. "I've been recording this entire conversation. Amazing what technology can do these days, isn't it?" Elena picked up her purse and straightened her dress. "I'll be withdrawing the business assets you've been claiming, freezing the joint accounts you've been accessing, and filing for an emergency restraining order to prevent you from interfering with Solaris Marketing's operations. My lawyer will be in touch with your lawyer, assuming Harold Brennan is still practicing law after the Bar Association finishes their investigation." As Elena walked away from the table, she heard David call her name, but she didn't turn around. She had spent 8 years listening to his lies, and she was done. 3 months later, Elena sat in her newly renovated office, reviewing the final divorce settlement that had been reached just hours before David's scheduled federal trial. He had agreed to relinquish all claims to Solaris Marketing, accept minimal alimony, and provide full restitution to his previous wives in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution. The afternoon sun streamed through her windows, casting the same golden light that had been there the day David had first presented her with his separation agreement. But everything else had changed. Elena had emerged from the battle not just victorious, but transformed. She was no longer the trusting woman who had built her business through hard work and determination. She was now a warrior who had fought for everything she'd created and won. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Vasquez, the reporter from Forbes, is here for your interview about the Top 40 Under 40 feature." Elena smiled and stood up, straightening her blazer. The article would focus on her business success, her innovative marketing strategies, and her plans for expansion. It wouldn't mention David or the divorce. That chapter of her life was closed. But as she walked toward the conference room where the reporter was waiting, Elena caught her reflection in the office window. The woman looking back at her was confident, powerful, and completely in control of her own destiny. David had tried to destroy her, but instead, he had created something much more dangerous, a woman who knew exactly what she was capable of when pushed to her limits. Elena Vasquez had not just survived betrayal. She had turned it into fuel for the empire she was still building. And this was only the beginning.